August 1969. 4 people have been tasked with the mission to murder strangers in the most gruesome fashion possible, the results of which haunted an entire nation for decades. In 2008, writer and director Bryan Bertino took this notion and crafted one of the most terrifying thrillers of this century, one that answered the horrific question of why would you do this to us with a simple reply: because you were home. Be careful out there, because The Strangers was inspired by a true story. Welcome to True Crime for Cinephiles. This is inspired by a true story, a podcast devoted to keeping artists honest. We will discuss the overall details of the actual crimes, then review the film on its own, how much that's true and how much was Hollywood magic. I'm Aaron Peterson, an accredited film critic for the Hollywood Outsider podcast and a devoted true crime follower. And joining me, our fellow film critics and true crime devotees, John Davenport.
Hi, how you doing today?
Wonderful. And Amanda Sink.
Hello, hello.
We got to get John, you got to get your own intro.
I really do, because I felt so awkward that just there. It was just...
hey, how you doing? Who popped into my living room?
I'm surprised we're here.
Well, we're talking about the Strangers this time, and we're talking about like both films. I just, Rennie Harlan is crafting a new trilogy of these, I think for Netflix, but this is the original Strangers, 2008, and then a little bit of 2018's Strangers Prey by Night. Not so much the movie, but the Keddie murders, which obviously, if you're a real true crime devotee, you've heard of these before. What did you think of The Strangers, I guess, the first time you saw it?
For me, I have to admit, somehow The Strangers ended up being in my blind spot as far as movies are concerned. For as long as these movies have been around, I just never got around to watching them. So this is watching it for this episode was like the first time I've had a chance to experience it.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I can't remember my response when I first watched it, because I did watch it, years ago, but I've watched it probably 3 to 4 times in total now. And I will say, for the film itself, I don't feel like it is super rewatchable, but somehow I keep getting stuck rewatching it with people who haven't seen it is typically what happens. And I think it's one that's, it's still a good movie for like first time watchers, to get familiar with it, but it does lose some of its oomph the second, third time around. Once
you see all the things that, man, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? What the hell were you thinking? Those things.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, maybe call the police, not your boyfriend.
Look, the first time they came to the door, I would have called the police. Let's be honest. Like the first time. There wouldn't be a second time. It'd be like, it's 4 in the morning. I wouldn't even
show up to the door. You know what? This was 2008, but in 2023, I got a Ring doorbell. I'm not even answering the door. We're talking through the camera.
We're not talking. It's 4 in the morning. I'm just calling the police.
Yeah, no. 4 in the morning and the Ring camera's on. I'm not even talking. I'm just looking at the thing if I have to look at it. I'm not giving that any more attention than it has to be.
Light bulbs unscrewed.
Yeah. That's never a good sign.
That was the first thing where I was like, dude, you knew that it was unscrewed. Now immediately call the police. But I will say, I will never, ever, ever, ever be the person who ignores my door because, and this is like a personal story, but I'll make it super quick. My nan, so my grandmother, several years ago, somebody broke into her house, attempted to murder her, beat her in the head with a hammer, tried to rape her. Like, it was really, really horrific. Drug her outside. She managed to get away and she went to the neighbor's house. And probably the only reason that she survived is because they opened the door and called the police and got her help.
Wow.
So that's where I'm like, I don't think I'll ever turn away answering the door, like trying to at least see if somebody's needs help and has a need. But I'm probably not going to open the door right off the bat. You know what I mean? So I'd
Yeah,
be still
sure.
very precautious, but I personally can never not answer the door just because I never know if that situation could be on my doorstep.
Now, do you want to tell that story again, but with ominous music behind it?
Might as well at this point.
Try to find the humor. That's all. That's all I'm trying to do. It's just,
wait, where's the humor in this?
no, nothing. That's a horrible story, but I'm glad she's okay. I'm glad she made it.
Yeah, she's not alive anymore, but she died from something else. She survived that. She was a fighter, and the neighbors were the ones who really did make sure she was okay and took care of her.
They're
and
the
without
real
them,
heroes.
She probably wouldn't have. Yeah.
They're the real heroes. Not the cops, not the firefighters, not the paramedics, but the neighbors are the real heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Screw those other people.
Well, they're the ones that gave her aid when she really needed it. So,
yep, absolutely.
yeah, I would say so. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple different crimes. We'll talk about one set, then we'll come back, discuss, and then we'll go back to the other set. But I just want to point out, yes, these are cases that people probably have heard 1,000 times, especially the Manson end of it, because the Manson murders did inspire the Strangers to a degree, and the Keddie murders inspired other aspects of the Strangers and Strangers Pray at Night. If you listen to true crime, you've probably heard of both of these cases. If you've been alive for any period of time, you've heard of the Manson case. But some of the details you might not know unless you watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because then you got a lot of them, but changed.
Yeah, just slightly different. You know, kind of like how Hitler didn't really die the way that he did in the other Tarantino movie.
Yeah. I like how he makes revisionist history, by the way.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
for him.
It's good how it's got a good beat. You can dance to it.
It's just like, this is how we wish it would have went. That's
Right.
kind of how he does history. All right. Well, as of this recording, The Strangers is streaming on Netflix. But that's always subject to change. But just in case somebody has not seen it and wants to check it out, 2008's The Strangers was written and directed by Bryan Bertino and follows a young couple immediately following a wedding reception that led to a proposal gone bad. In other words, she said no. Scott Speedman stars as James Hoyt and Liv stars. Stop, John. You hold your thoughts on the movie itself.
All right, holding on it.
And Liv stars as Kristen McKay, and when they arrive home, it's very late at night, and strangers arrive at their door looking for someone that isn't there. What follows is a night of sheer terror as James and Kristen attempt to fend off three maniacs who happen to attack them just because they were home. And in 2018's The Strangers Pray at Night, which is the sequel, came like a decade later. A family of four stay at a remote mobile home park and are stalked by three strangers as well. That film starred Christina Hendricks and Martin Henderson and was written by Bryan Bertino again, but also with Ben Keddie, and directed by Johannes Roberts. I should say, some people haven't seen The Strangers Pray at Night. I think it holds up pretty closely to the original. So it's a good film. It's a very good film. This one's hard to talk about, but let's get into it. New episodes are released every 2 weeks and can be found wherever you listen to podcasts or at thehollywoodoutsider.com. You can also hear episodes early by supporting the show at patreon.com/thehollywoodoutsider. Remember, film and true crime fans are always debating how true their true crime is. So let's answer the door. It's time to invite in the strangers.
These are the overall details of the case. Please be warned. Inspired by a true story, deals with crimes that may contain adult themes and violence, and is intended for a mature audience.
July 25th, 1969. Charles Manson, an aspiring musician, and several of his followers moved to a remote ranch in Topanga Canyon, California. That same month, Manson family member Bobby Beausoleil stabs Gary Hinman to death. Hinman was a music teacher who introduced Manson to Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson, as well as record producer Terry Melcher. Beausoleil was accompanied by Mary Brunner and Susan Atkins. August 8, 1969. Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Charles Tex Watson were tasked by Charles Manson to scare Manson's old rival, record producer Terry Melcher. Melcher had refused to give Manson a record contract. They were ordered to kill everyone in Melcher's house as gruesome as they could. The only problem was that this house was now occupied by director Roman Polanski and his actress wife, Sharon Tate. While Polanski was in Europe working on a film, their friends Wojciech Frykowski and coffee heiress Abigail Folger were staying with Tate. Jay Sebring, a celebrity hairstylist and friend of Sharon's, was also there. Sharon Tate was more than 8 months pregnant. It was after midnight on August 8th when they arrived at 10050 CeeLo Drive. Tex Watson drove to the estate and immediately encountered a car driven by 18-year-old Stephen Parent. Stephen was simply visiting the caretaker on site, and he begged for his life, saying he would never, ever say a word. This is when Tex lunged at him with a knife, severing the tendons on his hand, and then proceeded to shoot him 4 times in the chest. They then pushed the car up the driveway. Tex Watson cut the phone line. Then he, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel broke into the house, leaving Linda Kasabian as lookout by the gate. Tex entered through a screened window and let the other 2 in through the front door. They found the 4 in the house: Tate, Frykowski, Sebring, and Folger. When Tex Watson found Sebring asleep on the couch, Sebring asked him who he was and what he was doing there. Watson's chilling and infamous reply was, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." Tex tied Tate and Sebring together by their necks with a nylon rope, throwing it then over the ceiling beams. When Sebring scoffed at the treatment of Tate, Tex Watson shot him. Folger went to the back bedroom to give the intruder $70 in hopes of sparing her life. Watson stabbed her 7 times. Somehow she escaped into the pool area, where Krenwinkel caught up to her and stabbed her again. Then Watson joined in, stabbing her a total of 28 times. Frykowski freed himself and began struggling with Atkins, who then stabbed his leg with a knife. He found his way out the front door, but Watson caught up, hitting him over the head with the gun, stabbing him multiple times. Some reports have it listed as over 50 times, and then shooting him twice. Linda Kasabian told Atkins she heard someone coming in an attempt to stop the murders. It did not work. Lastly, tragically, Sharon Tate pleaded to be allowed to give birth and offered herself as a hostage. They did not accept this. She was stabbed over 15 times by Atkins and Watson before being hung by a nylon rope. And before they left, they used Sharon Tate's blood to write the word pig on the front door. These are the murders that partially inspired The Strangers, but for those who don't know the rest of the Manson saga, let me explain. August 10th, 1969. The second set of murders occurred at the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca at the Los Feliz neighborhood of LA, California. Charles Manson and several of his followers, including Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, brutally murdered the LaBiancas. The LaBianca murders were also characterized by extreme violence. The victims were tied up, brutally stabbed, and killed. The word war was carved into Lino LaBianca's stomach. Similar to the Tate murders, the crime scene was staged to resemble a random act of violence. Phrases like "death to pigs" and "rise" were written in blood on the walls, and a fork was left in the abdomen of Lino LaBianca. The bodies of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca were discovered by their children when they returned home on the evening of August 10, 1969. The shocking and gruesome nature of the murder sent shockwaves through the community and law enforcement. On August 16, 1969, police arrested Charles Manson and several of his followers on unrelated charges. December 1st, 1969, Charles Manson and more of his followers, including Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Charles Tex Watson, are charged with the Tate and LaBianca murders. June 15, 1970, the trial of Charles Manson and his followers begins. On January 25, 1971, Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Charles Tex Watson are found guilty of murder and other charges. March 29, 1971, Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Charles Tex Watson are sentenced to death. Later, their sentences are commuted to life in prison after the California Supreme Court invalidated the state's death penalty in 1972.
So these are some of the most gruesome murders that I think most of society is aware of. Like the things that they did, even the direction. So there's always a conversation of like, was Charles Manson really the one at fault here? Obviously, the court said, yep, sure was, because he gave the order. He's the one who directed them. He's the one who guided them to doing this. But there's like a level of vindictiveness in each of those individuals who took part in the crimes because of the extent they went to. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, you probably really didn't need to grab some blood and write some words on the wall. You probably didn't need to leave a fork in someone's stomach. You probably didn't need to carve words into them. You probably didn't need to go hang them. And you probably also didn't need to make sure that they got stabbed 50 times or things like that. Like, these individuals enjoyed and took pleasure in being horrific.
You know, the thing that I always found shocking about the idea of the Manson family is just how small in stature Charles Manson is. He's not some giant. When you see him before he's in prison or anything like that, when he's out and about and being a normal human being, you don't see him and go, oh, he is the kind of person who can definitely get people to lead. He is this tiny little man who's just supplying drugs to people. And even then, when they finally caught him, he was a coward about it. He was hiding underneath the bathroom sink. And the only reason why they found him was because he didn't clear his hair, his long hair out from the door, from the cabinet door in which he had closed himself into. Like, I will never understand how this whole thing happened when you have such a tiny little man who has
tiny little man.
He is so tiny. The only thing I can think of is that these people were high 90% of the time.
You never really will understand the appeal of a cult leader. I feel like unless you're in the cult, I don't think anyone has ever seen a cult leader and gone, I get it. You know, I really don't. It's amazing to me how things like this happen pretty regularly, that people are in a state of loss or depression or mental illness or whatever the case is, and they find someone that can, for whatever reason, speak to them in a language that makes sense to them but doesn't make sense to anyone else, and they end up following that person to the ends of the earth doing the most horrific things. It's so impossible to understand, I feel like. I really feel like it's one of those things we'll just never understand completely as a society. Because it's a culmination of factors, right? Because this happens often where cult leaders find people that will do horrible things for them if they just believe in them. And then when you sit down and you talk to me like, well, that guy just sounds nuts. Like Charles Manson, I've never seen an interview where I understood what people were attracted to. But for whatever reason, dozens of them did.
Yeah. Most recently, I think we have the best example of the same sort of thing as the guy who was the head of NXIVM. You know, he is not someone who...
Or David Koresh. I mean, there's a lot of examples of it.
Well, the most recent one, I mean, David Koresh is another one, yes. But the most recent one, I think, is the NXIVM guy, because he's somebody who again, is... Like, David Koresh, I look at that guy, I sort of get it, you know? He looks like a decent dude. He looks like he knows what he's doing. The NXIVM guy, Charles Manson guy, they're not what you would typically say are people that have charisma.
But that's just it. That's the thing. Like, I don't think there's a certain level of charisma you have to have. It's, you have to have people in a very specific place in their life that have, for whatever reason, believe in whatever you're believing in, and they believe you're the one that can lead them to the promised land of whatever it is that you believe.
That's fair.
The reality is he's not the type to invoke fear, right? Like, we get that. He's not the equivalent to like Pablo Escobar or something.
Escobar, maybe.
Even Escobar. I'm a little bit more scared of Escobar, but the biggest thing that comes into this is he had, and this was stated by multiple of his followers, he had this ability to manipulate individuals. And that's all it really is. It's manipulating them. To Aaron's point, it's people who are in a place where they can be manipulated, but... Are you laughing about Escobar?
Yes, I can't believe you invoked his name on this.
Well, it's just a callback, right?
Yeah,
It's a good old Cocaine Bear episode if you haven't listened.
You're just like the Pablo Escobar. What? How are we here again?
So with this, he had this ability to manipulate them. I guess there was one point where there was an acid trip that made him, that he interpreted as basically being Jesus Christ, like reincarnation of Jesus. And I feel like anytime you bring religion into people who have a hopeless life or they feel hopeless and give them some spark of hope that you are a successor, you are something that is magical, that transcends time and the universe and things like that, and you have people who are on drugs on top of that, it sure leads to the ability to be manipulated and bought into this. And on top of that, what I understand is that he had this Ted Bundy-like personality where he was able to charm and get people lured in initially with his like chill guitar playing hippie vibes. You know what I mean? Like he had a way to get people entered into his presence, and then he took the following steps to manipulate them and help, him get what he wanted out of it. And at the end of the day, all it was is him just being really good at using people.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's some charisma there, I guess, yeah.
I guess I'm wrong. There is some charisma there. He was a performer, and he was somebody, who was able to get himself into sort of being, I guess, a Z level celebrity to some extent, because he had connections in Hollywood and in the music business. So
right.
I guess there's a lot of that. His background's something that I always found interesting, because he doesn't come from like a background in which you would expect somebody to. I guess expect is the wrong word, because he does come from basically a background of growing up in crime, in being abandoned and being left to his own devices and having to fend for himself, which is a perfect building blocks for somebody like this.
What I find fascinating about this entire situation is everyone knows who Charles Manson is. Everyone knows about the Manson murders. Many people know who Sharon Tate is. Many people know Roman Polanski from other situations, which we're not going to get into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I feel bad in this scenario, but I don't feel bad in other situations. But that's beside that's a whole other case if we ever cover that one. But what boggles my mind is how little everybody actually knows about the murders that took place. Because everyone knows Charles Manson, everyone knows the Manson murders. They know that Sharon Tate was murdered. Most people don't know everybody else that was in the house. But the actual specifics, most people I know don't know those details until, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood came out, and it kind of gave versions of those details, like recreated versions of those details. Up until then, many people I know had no idea how it happened.
Partially because of the time in which it was done, because information wasn't as readily available as it is today. But also, it's kind of like it's the telephone game. As time has progressed, details have been lost, and it's become more and more about the people who committed the crime versus the people who were victimized by it. That's one of the things that I think a lot of true crime is starting to try to do these days, which is to keep the victims in play, keep the victims honored, and make it their story versus trying to make it the story about the criminals. And a lot of what we find about people and how they decide they want to become known, there is a segment of people who run around and say, hey, I want to be famous, and I'm going to do it by killing a bunch of people. Reducing the amount in which names get passed out or details get passed out is helpful in that respect.
Well, this one is a very horrific situation because it's very reminiscent of the Danny Rolling case, where they just came in the middle of the night, except this is multiple people. They came in the middle of the night and destroyed several people's lives. It's insane. It's insane how this happened and rippled through history because it became one of the most horrific crimes in history. And many other cases of close to replicating that, like Jeffrey Donovan is very similar to the Manson murders, or I'm sorry, Jeffrey McDonald is what it was. He was the army captain whose pregnant wife and 2 daughters were murdered in like the 70s.
Right. And then recently the Kings Road murders.
Yeah, Kings Road murders too. Sure, would apply. But the Jeffrey McDonald ones, they actually wrote in blood on the wall. It was very tied into the whole Manson concept.
And I think that element, especially from the movie The Strangers, is what makes it so horrifying, because you were home. That means that there's no specific motive. There's nothing that you could or couldn't have done differently that would have prevented this. It's legitimately just, this could happen to anybody. We could have chose any house. We chose yours. You're the subject, which means, that instills, I think, more fear than anything else, because you don't know what to do to prevent it. When it's something that's more specific, or they have like characterizations that they're, targeting, a lot of times it's something specific with women. So we have all these different like preventative processes that we try to do, which we've talked about on former episodes too. You don't have that when someone's just like, yeah, we just decided this was the right one. We're here. You're here.
One thing I kind of love is how, and it isn't in Strangers, it is in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, how Tarantino took that really chilling line, I'm the devil and I'm here to do the devil's business, and made it like a joke. Just because it's made it absolutely ridiculous. Because it is an absolutely ridiculous line, but in the course of murdering a bunch of several people in their, home in the middle of the night, that's terrifying. But the way he did it with the whole joke, and Brad Pitt's like, what? Like, just all of that made it funny.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's a good callback.
Yep.
Terrifying case, though. Like, when you actually go through the details, it's an absolutely terrifying case.
Yeah, and that was done and perpetrated in a time in which there was much more common for people to be lax about their home security, much more laxed about how they answered the door or who they spent their time with. It's not like today where, I was talking to some friends at the gym and they were telling me how anytime they meet somebody new, they go and do a deep dive on them on police records and stuff like that. I'm like, how do you people even find this stuff? But that's what they do now.
It never surprises me how depraved humanity is at times. We've done several of these cases. The Danny Rowland case really stuck with me just because of how horrific those murders were. Murdering an 8-month pregnant woman is just beyond insane to me. There's so many things where it's just like, you think, well, you know what? The world isn't as bad as we think it is. Then you dive into these and like, no, it really is. It's pretty bad.
It's actually worse than we thought. The other thing that always surprises me with this is how, you go there with the intention, and I understand that the directions were a little bit unclear, right? So it was just murder everybody that's in this guy's house. So you don't know how they're connected to Melcher,
like
right?
Accident,
like that's
though,
the whole
right?
thing.
He didn't expect them to be there. Yeah.
They didn't know that this house was now occupied by other people, but like, you don't recognize Sharon Tate? I feel like you probably recognize her. Like, that doesn't stop you or cause a logical moment to be like, dang, did we get the right house, guys? What's going on?
Yeah, but by that point, they're so hopped up on whatever it is they're on and so pumped up.
That's true. They already did murder someone and got this far into it.
They're in a frenzy at that point, and then you can tell they're in a frenzy because of just how much they do.
I mean, there's so many, like over at least closing in on 100 stab wounds across the board. That's insane to me. It just, oh my God. But that's not as bad as the next case, if you can believe it.
I don't believe it. Tell us about it, Aaron.
I do believe it because the world is terrible.
Yeah, the world is terrible. Well, the Keddie murders are also known as Cabin 28, if you haven't heard this or heard the very details, the very specific details of this case, it'll turn your stomach. So let me begin. Sue Sharp left her husband in 1979, taking her 5 children with her and relocating from Connecticut to Northern California. She initially rented a small trailer, but when Plumas County Sheriff Sylvester Douglas Thomas moved out of cabin number 28, Sue Sharp and her family moved in, and they consisted of 15-year-old son John, 14-year-old daughter Sheila, 12-year-old daughter Tina, 10-year-old Rick, and 5-year-old Greg at the time of the murders. On April 11th, 1981, Sue, Sheila, and Greg were en route to pick up Rick from Quincy when they saw John and his 15-year-old friend Dana Hall Wingate hitchhiking. Sue gave them a ride to Keddie. 2 hours later, John and Dana hitchhiked back to Quincy, as they had plans to meet up with friends. They were seen downtown. Sheila had plans to spend the night in cabin number 27 with the Seabolt family. So Sue stayed home with Rick, Greg, and their friend Justin Smart. Sheila left cabin number 28 shortly after 8 p.m. to head to the Seabolts, and Tina, who had been at the Seabolts, returned to cabin 28 around 9:30 p.m. At around 8 a.m. on April 12, 1981, the next morning, Sheila returned home to cabin 28. At that time, she discovered the bodies of John, his friend Dana, and her mother Sue. Tina was missing. Rick, Greg, and Justin were all found safe in an adjacent bedroom. Although they claimed to have slept through the murders, it was later discovered that the boys witnessed at least a portion of these events. The murders of John, Dana, and Sue were vicious. All 3 victims had been tied up with medical tape and electrical cords. 2 bloodied knives and a hammer were found on site. 1 knife was bent almost in half. All of the murders occurred in the living room. John's throat had been slashed. Dana had been strangled to death. Both boys had been bludgeoned repeatedly before their deaths. Sue was found on her side, on her couch, nude from the waist down, gagged with a blue bandana and her own panties. She had been stabbed in the chest and throat. The wound went as deep as her spine, and on the side of her head there was an imprint matching the butt of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB gun. Tina was still missing, as were her jacket and shoes. She was reported missing but not found until April 22nd, 1984, 3 years later. A skull was found in Feather Falls, about 100 miles from Keddie, and those remains were identified as Tina's. Shortly after the remains were found but not identified, the sheriff's office received an anonymous call identifying those remains as Tina's. But this call was not documented, though the recording was found decades later in 2013. No one was charged with these murders. No one was proved culpable, though there was a neighbor, Martin Smart, that was liked as a main suspect. It has never been proven, and he did die in June 2000. A hammer that matched the description of one that Martin Smart claimed to have lost around the time of the murders was found in a local pond in 2016. And that's all we know about the Keddie murders.
Again, incredibly horrific, and people who just take pleasure in being gruesome.
This one bothers me more than the Manson murders because with the whole fact that it's unsolved, the whole fact that there's no underlying motive behind this, or at least an understanding of the motive. That's why this one bothers me the most of the 2 of them, because the other ones, we have the story and we know why they were set upon they were. Here, it's literally people just showed up, did something, and left, and never once were heard from again.
And to a bunch of kids. And also, it leaves so many questions. Why just those 4? Why not the others that were in the other bedroom? Why did they take Tina? What did they do to Tina? How long was Tina alive after this happened? You know what I mean? There's just so many remaining questions.
Yeah, I'm not asking any of those questions. I'm not. I don't want to know what happened to Tina. I don't want to know why they took her.
It's just terrible.
Yeah.
It's disturbing. There have been many documentaries and true crime podcasts that go into all the details. There's a lot there. But the fact that Justin said that he didn't see anything, then he said he dreamed the details, and then did a description of the perpetrators, etc. There's a lot of unsures there, a lot of confusing points. We're dealing with kids. You don't know what kids see and what they don't see, but we don't want to speculate. I just don't want to be one of those podcasts that speculates on who committed atrocious crimes. But it is fascinating. It's a fascinating case. Horrific, yes, but also fascinating. And once again, man, can you imagine someone that was staying just, down the way, just right next door to your own mother's house or cabin, and no one hears anything? No one sees really anything? It's mind-boggling to me. You just assume that people are going to, well, there's got to be witnesses, right? Because, you think about if something like that happened, 3 people are butchered and one is taken out of the house, somebody's going to hear something. But that's not the case. And it happens very frequently that that's not the case.
Oof, sorry, that just put me in a place that, oof.
I hope it's a quiet place, because that would make the rest of the podcast better.
Okay.
Oof.
Zynga. Just kidding. I'm kidding, John. I'm kidding. Don't leave. Come back. All right. Well, lastly, there's one more story to tell in regards to the strangers. So writer Bryan Bertino mentioned he was also inspired by a situation that happened to him as a child. It was at night, and his parents left him at home alone with his little sister. Their home was a house in the middle of nowhere, and later that night, someone knocked on the front door, which his little sister then answered. They asked for someone who didn't live there, and then they went away, leaving the kids unnerved. What they later found out was that these people were knocking on doors in the area, and if anyone didn't answer, if anyone wasn't home, they then robbed those homes.
Oof.
They also came back asking for the same person again, which makes it even creepier.
Mm-hmm. Are you sure you're home, little girl? Mm-hmm.
The devil, as some may say, knocked on their door twice.
But at least they were just robbing. It doesn't sound like they were.
I guess that's the positive. But I will say, robbing, if people are home, robbers will, depending on the individuals, but it can often lead to physical injury to the individuals in the home.
Yeah, as people are trying to defend themselves and they end up in worse situations. Yeah. And some people believe, well, if you don't do anything, they'll just take what they want and leave. I'm not going to take that chance.
Nope.
Mm-mm.
I will go back to my story about my grandmother just super quick. They went to her house intentionally to rob her, to steal her vehicle. Mm-hmm. And solely because, and she was asleep through all of that. Like, they could have taken the keys and they could have left. They could have gotten what they wanted. But because she was there, the main guy, I should say, wanted to pretty much take her out, leave no witnesses. And that's what perpetuated the whole situation. So even if you're quiet, even if you're asleep, they could still be inspired to come for you.
Yeah, you just never
even
know.
if they're just there to rob. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have my own story that's kind of like this as far as being a kid in a weird situation where we were home. It was us kids. Both my parents worked. I think it was in the middle of the summer, and it was us with the. You're all going to sit there and look down at your nose at me for saying this next phrase, but our maids were with us.
Oh, okay.
In Panama.
Okay.
In Panama.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the kids' room, as it was called, which was a side room that was built
the side house.
Well, which was a side room built onto the house,
the pool house.
Which is where we had our kids' TV and our kids' area, and this is where we spent most of our time.
And this is where cash rained down from the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
One of the windows were it was kind of cracked, and we look over as we're playing one day, and there's this set of hands that is just messing with the windows.
Oh no!
Yeah,
That's terrifying.
It's just a set of hands, and so we got we got Angela's attention, which was one of our maids. She sat there and she watched and she saw the hands. And so she pops her head out and screams bloody murder as she sees this guy trying to essentially climb up to where this window was. And yet his pants were down.
What?
Yeah, it was a whole thing.
Hold on. This story got dark. Really, quick turn.
Did he not have a belt? Maybe he didn't have a belt. Let's try to look at the optimistic side.
He didn't have... His pants were all the way down.
Okay. So he had
and
an
his
intent.
undies.
He was doing something.
And his undies.
Both layers were all the way down. And as soon as he saw it was like, I guess, a grown-up or something, or there was a tension that was drawn to him, he took off running into the woods like...
With his pants down? Because that's a hilarious sight, if so.
Well, yeah. Like, he was starting to pull them up as he was running,
Waddle.
we called the MPs and Guardias over and everything, and they went into the woods looking for him, and it was a whole thing. But yeah, I've had a similar kind of story.
Did they ever find him?
No.
Ugh. He probably went to somebody else's house.
Or, yeah, it's possible. Or,
Icky.
it's a rainforest. You never can tell what's going to happen in a rainforest.
You think maybe he got mauled by some animal and died?
That would be fun.
That would be fun.
Or he just escaped.
Karma. Or he escaped.
He just escaped.
I like the idea that karma happened.
Or he just escaped.
Like Pablo Escobar jumped out of nowhere and just took him down.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm looking for.
I mean, I think everybody has a little story like that. I can tell you a bunch of them, but I actually grew up very, very poor. I didn't have any maids. That's for sure.
Both my parents worked. Come on.
My mom worked.
He only had one parent. How about them apples?
Still didn't have a maid. I don't care if I had 6 parents. I didn't have a maid. I lived in the projects. I was very, very poor. We came home and they were always...
Should have grown up in another country.
Yeah, apparently. Apparently. So anyway, but these are like 3 stories, one back to back to back of horrific things that happen in the middle of the night when you should be safe at home. So it just goes to show, like, even then, we used to think, oh, you can leave your door open all the time. No, you really shouldn't. You never know. You never know. Take the security you can,
I think the difference between, because there is that concept of like, oh, kids used to be able to play on the street and we didn't have to worry. They could go do whatever they wanted, or we could leave our doors unlocked and we didn't have to worry about someone breaking in. No, bud, you just got lucky. Mm-hmm. And what happened is that the internet happened and made it very, very accessible for us to be constantly aware of the things that are happening. Now, I'm not going to say that there hasn't been an increase in crime. Like, obviously, we've seen an
decreased over the years. That's actually statistically.
Oh, okay. Well, screw me and my wrong math.
The reason why it's been decreased is population growth. So.
Oh, see, there you go. There you go.
You don't know that's the reason. A lot more people have Ring doorbell cameras now. A lot more people have cameras in their houses. They have more security systems. Like, there's a greater prominence of attacking versus reacting. Yeah, being proactive. Exactly. Versus being proactive versus being reactive. There's a huge influx of that. Where in the old days, we didn't do anything security-wise until after we were robbed, or after someone came to the door and did something creepy. That's when we did something. Nowadays, people are very proactive about it. So let's talk about The Strangers a little bit. So in terms of the movie, right? I think the overlasting impression with the movie for me was it was terrifying because it tapped into that fear that everyone has that nobody talks about, is that fear of someone coming into your house the middle of the night and you not being able to do anything about it. There's a moment where Liv Tyler's inside her house and she thinks she's safe because everything's outside. And then you see the killer behind her, or the eventual killers. One of them is behind her in her own house while she thinks she's still safe. That's a terrifying moment to know that, well, they're already in there. They've already figured out how to be in this house.
That was so well done.
It was very subtle, quiet, wasn't showy, didn't do anything dramatic. It was just, we saw it, she didn't see it, and it terrified us because then you don't know when is that character going to pop out again.
As far as a movie is concerned, one of the things that I liked about it is very little in the way of jump scares. It was more tension.
Mm-hmm. The atmosphere.
Yeah, tension and atmosphere. Build up the tension, let it go a little bit. Build up the tension, let it go a little bit. And occasionally there'd be something that, because of the rhythm, made sense to have a scare that could be categorized as a jump or something like that. But the tension was something that was so wonderfully done.
Yeah, and the little things that kind of led up to each moment too, right? Like, there was a slow build to getting to the point of them actually being in the home, doing things with the individuals. They took their time. They didn't rush in. They wanted to bring the horror to that person's face, and they wanted to be a part of that. And that required them being stealthy and getting into the home. And there's the one thing that I didn't like too much that I struggled with, because there are those really great moments that are built up and the tension is there, and they're trying to do this slow build and add in, kind of sprinkle it in to really play with the individual's mind and the audience's mind and all of that tension that's being drummed up as you go along, because they're not hitting the house real hard. They're not going right in. But I felt like I had so much slow build in the beginning too of the relationship that it made it feel like the entire movie was too drawn out until we got to that point.
I felt like I appreciated what they were trying to do, right? The whole idea with the relationship was they were trying to show she wasn't ready for marriage. They were just showing like this whole couple's
justifying,
dynamic. And just going through this very quickly, like, here's where they are in this stage of their relationship. Here's why they're having a little bit of a tiff. And then you get the end moment where she wears the ring, and it's just like, oh my God, she realizes that he's the one, da da da. It's a very heartbreaking moment at the end. I don't know. I think they spoke to it too much in the beginning, where it kind of drug it out a little bit. And Scott Speedman, I know John has his issues with him, which we'll talk about in a second, but I didn't really have as many issues with him. My only issue probably is more some of the things they didn't do when they should have done them. But it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback when people are victims of crimes, because you might have done something completely different, but other people would have done these same things. They would have handled it the same way, because men are very macho and they think it's no big deal, and women can be skittish. Like, these are all stereotypes that people have. And I would like to think that people would handle it completely different, but you just never know until you're in the situation.
Yeah, my issue with Scott Speedman is that I didn't find him to be macho. I didn't find him to be much of anything. I just felt like he was in a different movie, because it was like things were affecting Liv Tyler in a way that were almost punched you in the gut, but things were affecting him in a way that he was just walking down the street or something. I spent part of the movie up until a certain point. I've spent part of the movie going, oh, he's in on this. This is something, he set this up. He had something to do with this, because he was too laid back. Because he's way too laid back about everything. Oh, and that was also like I'll go out and get you cigarettes, even though there's a cigarette still left in your ashtray there that you could just smoke, and then you can probably rest off. But, whatever. He's going to go do stupid things at 4:00 in the morning. I don't understand, but I didn't buy it. It wasn't until Mike showed up and he accidentally killed Mike that I buy the fact that he is a victim in this as well.
Oof, that was a brutal one.
That was brutal. And that was another moment where it was excellently executed, because you got Mike walking down the hallway slowly, kind of looking side to side to the other rooms, being like, hello, what's going on? And you can see the masked man behind him, and it's about to become a thing, or you're about to think it's going to be a thing, but you can also almost build up to know or see the fact that the outcome of what was really going to happen right there and then. So that was brutal. But yeah, it wasn't until then do you believe, okay, no, Scott Speedman's in this, but most of the time I'm like, he's in a different movie.
And in many respects, if he wouldn't have shot him, they might get out of there alive.
Oh yeah. I don't know why Mike wasn't making a bigger noise about him being in there, because obviously there's something going on. And again, easy to Monday morning quarterback this, but if it was me showing up at my friend's house and there's weird things about, I'm like, hello?
No, what I do is I leave and I go get the police immediately. But that's, again, Monday morning quarterback. You're also concerned with your friends, but do you want to announce your presence in case there's somebody still in the house? I mean, there's a lot of things. This movie plays with a lot of those things.
Right. I get it.
And we can also, it's easy for us sitting outside the situation to say, here's what we would do if we were in that situation. But when your brain is frazzled, like if you truly are terrified, your brain can respond differently and will respond differently unless you've been in terrifying situations before where you know that you are 100% able to control your mind and emotions and be logical. And a lot of people aren't. They're going to respond to the emotions that they have, and it's going to distract them, and it's going to make them do things that they ordinarily would never do.
Absolutely. What did you guys think about the ending where the two kids come by the house, which I thought was very sweet. Like they're just, hey, we're here missionaries, whatever we are. And then they find out Liv Tyler is alive. What did you think about that ending? That was quite the shock.
That kind of blew me away. The thing that I liked more about the ending wasn't necessarily that, but it was just how we never got the payoff to see what the strangers look like, right? You think at one point they get out of the car, they go and they talk to the Mormon kids. Are you a sinner? Sometimes. That was a whole weird moment, but I thought that was going to be a great payoff where we finally see who they are, or at least get an idea of what's going on. But then you realize who they are or what their faces look like didn't matter because they just personified these ghosts or this feeling of dread.
I don't want to see their faces. I never wanted to see their faces. That's something I think works in the movie's favor, the entire series, both films. If you see their face, it takes away. It takes a piece of the horror away. Not knowing who they are just shows that this could be anyone. This could be anyone you come across in your daily life.
Mm-hmm. And you never know who you're going to come across. Mm-hmm. But I did like that for most of these types of movies. If people are going to be dead, they're going to be dead. So to have some sort of like glimmer of hope, you know what I mean? And give some like optimism. And the reality is, people can survive really horrific, crazy things. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that it reminds me of is that if you are a fighter, if you don't give up, not always, but you can beat the odds. You can survive. And I'm going to stop going back to my grandmother's story after this, but they literally told her in the hospital, if you wouldn't have fought so hard for yourself, you wouldn't be alive right now. And I think that that's what it is. Like it's reminding you that people can survive and can overcome even the most brutal of situations.
Man, her life's going to suck after that, right?
It ain't going to be good.
No.
That's for sure.
That's not going to be great.
Maybe if I
imagine if I would have said, yeah, exactly. If I would have just said yes, we wouldn't even be here right now.
We might have been having a honeymoon somewhere. We would have been staying the night in a hotel. None of this would have happened.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have been home.
Well, no, they would have banged out a good one and been dead asleep when somebody was knocking on the door and never gotten up.
Or that approach, John.
No, they would have been out celebrating. Things would have lasted a lot. They would have.
You guys don't remember that they came home and that he had flowers and stuff all over the place as if they were supposed to be
I remember that, but they left earlier because he was upset. He was upset, so they left, and it was very down.
And they were supposed to come home to the celebration. Exactly. They would have stayed there longer. They would have, probably done something after.
Had fun. Lived life.
Yep. And instead, it ended.
Just goes to show, ladies, whenever a guy proposes, you have to say yes.
This is bad. No, this is bad advice. More than likely, you probably need to say no. Let's be honest.
I know it's weird, but that's probably my favorite aspect of the character moments in the movie is that she had the audacity in that moment to say no, because that's what you should do if you're not sure. Don't just say yes because of, somebody. That's why I don't like these big proposals, like when people do them at sporting events and concerts and things like that. Like, that's not fair to the person you're proposing to, because that doesn't give them the window to say no. And I really admire that her character said no. I mean, she changed her mind as she went. Well, yeah, she's on death's door. Of course she's changed her mind. This is the last guy I'm ever going to be with. So I guess, I wish I would have. But overall, she probably made the right call.
Also, don't propose to somebody unless you guys have talked about marriage and that person is like, yeah, I'd get married tomorrow to you.
Yeah, you're the one.
If you guys aren't for certain and you've had those conversations, just don't be doing that. Yeah.
One more reason not to like Scott Speedman's James, I guess. He didn't.
Yeah. Of course he didn't pay attention. He doesn't pay attention to much of anything until it's like in his face. And even then he's like, oh, I shot my friend. Crap. Crap. Hold on a second. Let me write some of this down. Do not propose until you have... All right, got it.
Yeah. Get the approval first. You got to really fish it. I will tell you, been in that boat, man. I have proposed and got the no. It's not a fun day. It's not.
Have you really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, oof.
To my current wife.
Oh, all right. Well,
yeah. If you just keep
she
going.
was smart.
If you're persistent enough, maybe she'll say yes eventually.
The first time she said no. Yep. And it was devastating. And I did the whole thing. But the second time, you didn't get any of that shit. It was just like, want to? Okay. You know.
It was a text message or something.
Yeah,
It
really.
was like,
Very
want to get married?
Oh, so many terrible things I can say right now.
Hey, I left your ring on
All
the
fair.
bathroom counter if you're down.
All fair.
This suddenly explains so much.
Doesn't it?
It does.
I do like how this, the film, in terms of taking the inspiration, it does completely make its own thing. Like there is no, I mean, yes, it was inspired by these things, but it's really its own story. And it's fascinating how the movie worked out. And actually, yes, it does have elements of those crimes. Prey at Night has a lot more of the elements of the Keddie murders for sure. But they're very much their own thing. How it plays out is very different. Like how everything rolls is completely its own thing, which is nice because you can hear the elements and you can hear the actual stories and you get that chill factor because, oh my God, that's so kind of close to what happened, but also completely separate enough that you can enjoy the movie and not have to think about those crimes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mm-hmm.
Anything more on Strangers or Strangers Prey at Night or this whole new trilogy of this series that is coming out eventually?
I don't know if we need a new trilogy of this series, but I would have to say that as this being my first experience with this movie and hopefully my last experience with Scott Speedman.
Jeez. You have so many issues.
Well, the only thing I remember the guy from is this now and the Underworld movies. And he wasn't great in that.
If it makes you feel better, he's in Grey's Anatomy.
No.
You know, what the movie got right and did it respect the victims. It wasn't really retelling those stories, so it's okay. I think. I feel like it's telling just an overall terrifying story, and it handled that right.
I think it handled it right too. The fact that it didn't really try to make itself something that was like the other stories does play to its favor, and I wouldn't really change any of that aspect. I would say it's great that they took the inspiration and did exactly what the inspiration should do, which is to give us all sort of a entertaining lesson that sort of scares the crap out of us.
What would you have done differently with the first, the main one, The Strangers? Would you have done anything differently with that film?
I personally would have integrated the relationship storyline a little bit differently. I see that there's value, especially like beginning to end type of thing, but there were a lot of moments with their relationship feud that I just didn't care about. Mm-hmm. And that made it almost difficult for me to stay involved waiting for this to happen. So I think if they would have paced it out a little bit differently, where they started bringing in the strangers a little bit sooner, and then we learn more about their relationship and what was going on throughout the movie, that I think would have played better for me personally.
I do think I would have liked to have seen hints of the strangers before even the door knock situation. You know, they pull up to the house and we can see shadows, or we see it from the point of view of shadows looking at the house or something to that effect. That would have been cool. I don't mind the relationship aspect or how they played it out because it made sense. I didn't get the impression that they were necessarily ending the relationship there and then, especially when they were about to have that moment before the door knock situation. So I felt like there was still a lot of love between the two of them. And I thought that part was sweet, even though they were obviously having a hard moment. And she was obviously going, it's not that I don't want to be with you. It's more like I'm not ready for that sort of commitment kind of thing. So I appreciate those aspects of what we saw. But I think I would have definitely hinted more at the strangers and hinted more and started building the tension so much sooner than they did.
One thing I will say is that the movie doesn't do James any favors because he's basically an asshole, plain and simple.
That's true.
I mean, she said no. I mean, I get you put in all this work, but on the same token, you should have got the ahead of time. Should have known how it was going to roll out. And you shouldn't be mad that she said no. You could be hurt, but he was basically just being he was trying to be
He was
subdued
bitter.
about it. Yeah, he was just bitter. I'm like, well, this is why you don't deserve to be married to her. God, man.
And also, he was very
And you don't take her seriously.
dismissive
Yes.
of her concerns. Exactly. And that really frustrated me. I feel like if that would have been different, it would have made him a more likable character that we wanted to follow too, that we wanted to see succeed. Where he could have, that would have demonstrated that, damn girl, like maybe you should have said yes. Like, this is a good guy. He's looking out for you. He's trying to take care of you and make sure you're safe. Like, instead of basically dismissing her concerns, he should have said immediately, like, hang up the phone, call the police. Like, I'm worried about you.
Right.
I'm coming back right now. And then he walks into like a situation or whatever. That I think would have played out a lot better too. And it would have made the end more emotionally impactful, because quite honestly, did anybody really care about him other than how it would impact her?
No, you're right. No.
Exactly. So it's like, I would have liked her to be not ready, but he's a really great guy. And like, we want them to be together, and oh, this is so, terrible. And he's starting to take care of her. He's trying to look out for her, basically being like alpha dude or whatever for her, but like not in an overbearing way. Mm-hmm. And then by the end, you're like, man, that's really sad, because now she has to live without this person that she realizes is such a great guy. And that the whole time, if she would have said yes, and she should have said yes, and we would have been like, dang girl, oof.
I think by 2008 standards, he did enough to be considered a good guy.
No, he didn't. Nope, I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you. He didn't take her seriously throughout the entire situation. When she raised her concerns, he didn't get her out of that house like he should have. He didn't call the police like he should have. He wasn't concerned about her safety. He left her alone right after some weird ass person comes at 4 a.m. showing up to the door. That's because he was, mopey. He's just a dick.
Selfish. He was thinking about himself. Very
selfish. Yeah, self-involved. He's not a good guy in my book.
I understand there's a hurt element, but like, even for 2000, I feel like 2008, people were more chivalrous than they are now. That's for dang sure.
No.
So him in 2008, he should have been the chivalrous guy. He should have been the one. Man. And to me, that is a demonstration of how much you love somebody. I love you enough that even though you said no to my proposal, or I'm not ready yet, that we're still going to try to work through this, and I still love you. So I'm going to take care of you at every end, at every turn. That's demonstrating you love someone selflessly.
Look, the strangers did her a favor. That's all I'm going to say. Like, she might have taken...
Honestly,
she might have taken a knife, but she dodged a bullet. You know what I'm saying?
Well done.
Nicely done.
Sometimes women, we need people to take care of things for us. We're not good decision makers sometimes. So you know what? I think you're right, Aaron. They helped her out. They did her a solid.
I would agree. They probably did her a solid. But I also don't know any of that life you're talking about, Amanda.
This is for our follow-up therapy session, John.
Oh, all right, fine.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share the show on your social media outlets. Give us a review in your favorite podcast app, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or whatever it is you listen to. Give us a review there. It really does help, because you are, once again, our best source of promotion. So tell your true crime fans about it. It really does help. And thank you for listening once again to Inspired by a True Story. Now let's keep those artists honest. While Polanski was in Europe working on a film, their friends Wojciech Frykowski.
Frykowski.
I want all of this in the outtakes.
No.
I want all of this in the outtakes. It has to be in the outtakes.
This one does. This one has to be.